Absolute value. The absolute value of a number is its distance from zero on a number line. The notation or symbol for absolute value is two vertical lines on either side of a number. If we were to consider a number, and let's call it n, we would write it like this. So this symbol here means the absolute value of some number n. Looking at a number line, let's find the absolute value of 4. If we look for the absolute value of 4, we can see our 4 is here. How far is 4 from 0? Well, I can draw an arrow to the 4, and I can see that it is 1, 2, 3, 4 units. So 4 is 4 units from 0 on a number line, and the absolute value of 4 is equal to 4. What about if we have the absolute value of -4? Well, again, we can look at that on the number line and see, as we draw our arrow, that it is 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0. So the absolute value of -4 is also equal to 4. Our arrows are the same length. Notice that we are looking at the distance the number is from 0 and not the direction. Absolute value is always non-negative. It is either a positive number or 0 because it is a distance. Because distance is never negative, the absolute value of any number is never negative. Let's look at -6 and 6 and find the absolute values of those numbers. So if I want to find the absolute value of -6, I need to determine how far it is from 0 on the number line. And I could draw my line and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or I really could count without drawing the line. But however I do it, I can see that the absolute value of -6 is 6. Because 6 is 6 units from 0 on the number line. And if I want to find the absolute value of +6, I could do it the same way by drawing a line or an arrow, or I could just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I see that +6 is 6 units from 0 on the number line, so its absolute value is also 6. -6 and 6 are opposites. They're the same distance from 0 on the number line, but in opposite directions. Opposite numbers have the same absolute value. Let's also look at the absolute value of 0. And if I were to locate 0 on the number line, it's right here, right? Has it moved any distance from 0? No, it's right at 0. So the absolute value of 0 is equal to 0. The absolute value symbol is a grouping symbol in order of operations. That means that we treat the absolute value bars or the absolute value symbol just like we treat parentheses. We simplify the expression inside the symbol first. Then we take the absolute value of the resulting number and continue with any operations outside the absolute value symbol. Let's look at some examples. And we're going to do this a little bit differently, but let's look at the absolute value of x and x could really be any number, but we're going to pick some values for x. So we're going to let x first be equal to 5. So what I need to do is substitute 5 into my absolute value for x. So I'm going to write my absolute value. Instead of an x, I'm going to write the 5. I have the absolute value of 5. And I can see it is 5 units from 0, or it is equal to 5. I could also let x be equal to -5. And again, I'm going to substitute a -5 for x in my absolute value. So I have the absolute value of -5. And that is, well, here's -5, and it also is 5 units from 0 on my number line. So the absolute value of -5 is 5. Let's look at another case. Let's look at the absolute value of the opposite of x. And we're going to consider these same two numbers. Let's let x equal 5. And we need to substitute 5 for x. So in my absolute value symbol, I have the negative, and then I have to substitute a 5 for x, and I'm going to write it in parentheses so we can see what that x really was. What we have is the absolute value of -5 now when we've simplified the parenthesis. And the absolute value of -5 we just found is 5. And if x is equal to -5, well, we are going to substitute -5 for x. So here's my first line of my absolute value sign, my opposite, because I want the absolute value of the opposite of x. So I have the opposite of, and for x, now I'm going to write -5. And again, that's in parentheses. So I can see that that's where what my x was. I need to simplify what's inside my absolute value symbol. I have the absolute value of the opposite of -5. Or another way to think about it is the absolute value of the opposite of 5. Well, that's 5. So we have the absolute value of 5, which we know is 5. What about if our absolute value sign has a negative number, a negative in front of it, or a negative number in front of it? Let's look at a negative in front of it first. What about if I have the opposite of the absolute value of x? Well, again, we're going to start letting x be equal to 5. And substituting a 5 into our expression, we have the opposite of the absolute value of 5, because we substitute 5 for x. Now we need to simplify the absolute value of 5 first and then apply the negative. So the absolute value of 5 is 5, and then we can apply the negative. So the opposite of the absolute value of 5 is negative 5. And if x is equal to negative 5, well, we're going to substitute this into our expression. And we have the opposite of the absolute value of, now instead of 5, we have negative 5. Again, the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. And then we apply the negative sign. It's as if we bring it down later. It's like we bring it down after we have simplified the absolute value, part of it first. And what if we want the opposite of the absolute value of the opposite of x? And again, we're going to use these same values for x. When x is equal to 5, substituting, we have the opposite of the absolute value of the opposite of 5. The absolute value of the opposite of 5 is positive 5. And then we bring down the opposite, or the negative sign. And if x is equal to negative 5, we have the opposite of the absolute value of the opposite of negative 5. We need to simplify what's inside our absolute value symbol first. So this is the opposite of the absolute value of, well, the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. The absolute value of 5 is 5. And then we bring down the negative. This opposite of an absolute value is confusing. It may be a lot easier for you if you think about that negative sign, or that as the opposite and not as a negative. What about if I have negative 4 times the absolute value of negative 3? Well, this means multiply. I don't need to write a multiplication symbol. It's understood. The first thing I want to do is find the absolute value of negative 3, which is 3. And then I'm going to multiply it by negative 4. And my parenthesis in this case means multiply. So 4 times 3, or I have negative 4 3s, or 3 times negative 4. I have 3 rows of negative 4s is equal to negative 12. You might be asking, what about if I have an expression inside my absolute value signs? What about if I have the absolute value of 5 minus 3? Well, my absolute value sign is a grouping symbol, which means I need to simplify what's inside the absolute value sign first. So that is the absolute value of 5 minus 3 is 2. I have the absolute value of 2, which is equal to 2. And then the last thing you might be thinking is, what about if I have an expression? What about if I have the absolute value of 8 plus 7 minus the absolute value of 4 plus 6. Again, I need to simplify what's inside each of my absolute value signs first. So 8 plus 7 is 15. So I have the absolute value of 15 minus the absolute value of 4 plus 6 is 10. And now I'm going to take the absolute values. The absolute value of 15 is 15 minus the absolute value of 10 is 10. And my difference is 5. Remember, absolute value is the distance a number is from 0 on a number line. It is always non-negative because distance is never negative. The absolute value symbol is a grouping symbol. That means that we need to simplify what's inside the absolute value symbol first, then take the absolute value of any resulting number, and finally continue with any operation outside the absolute value symbol. Thank you for watching.